It's my pleasure to introduce to you Peter Banks from the Blackwater Against New Nuclear Group, otherwise known as BANG. So, launched in 2008, BANG was formed to protect residents living near or on the Blackwater estuary in Essex from the risks of radioactivity and to oppose the development of new nuclear power facilities in the area. In particular, focus has been on opposition to the Bradwell B nuclear power development, as well as the Sizewell C development in Suffolk. Peter Banks is the coordinator of BANG and serves as a town councillor as well in West Mersea, and was the Green Party candidate for Harwich in North Essex during the 2019 general election. I'm crossing my fingers that none of that information is incorrect, because I realise I made some boo-boos on the agenda, but I'll stop talking now and hand you over to Peter Banks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ed, very much for your welcome. Everything was pretty spot on, except the scary bit of having to stand for an MP. You didn't put how tricky that is for that period. Anyway, I'm just going to share my screen so that we can make a start on my little presentation. And brilliant that we've got a good number of people that are listening to this. I'm going to minimize my so that you just see me. Ed, just give us a thumbs up if that all looks in order. Brilliant. Okay, let's roll forward. So what I want to do is to start with the Green Party manifesto. And if you stood as a prospective MP, you got a manifesto, and this printed manifesto has on page 11, as you can see, the Green Party policy EN014. And this is what I'm going to bookend this talk with. I think it's very important that people that are members of the Green Party at least understand this policy, because there are often misquotes, for example, that we want to scrap all nuclear power stations immediately. Well, I'm going to try and demonstrate that that is a really bad idea for climate change in the immediate period that we're in now. So at the moment, in the eastern region, we have 3 nuclear licensed sites. It may surprise you that some of them closed way back, 18 years ago. The top corner there, that's Bradwell. We now call it Bradwell A because of the prospect of the proposal for Bradwell B. It closed, but there's still a lot of evidence of radioactivity there, and I'm going to talk about it. It then moved on 4 years later. We have now what we call Sizewell A, which is in an earlier state of dismantling than Bradwell, and the current active nuclear power station on the Suffolk coast, Sizewell B, and that is got another 15 years to run, possibly a lot more. They may well do a life extension. The important point about this one is that it is much more powerful. It's a single reactor, and it uses a pressurized water reactor technology, which is the ones proposed for Hinkley Point C, Sizewell C, and Bradwell B. The 2 sites are just 45 miles apart, and then if you go directly west from the Bradwell site, you land up in the City of London. So what do I mean about it's still a nuclear licensed site? Well, this building here is called an interim storage facility, and originally it was supposed to just receive what they call the intermediate level waste. Now these are it's not the super high level waste, and it's not the things like overalls and gloves and materials. That's called low level waste, and that is shipped off to Cumbria. But within there is still material that's going to remain hot for many years and highly radioactive. Essex County Council overturned a planning restriction to allow import of waste, the similar intermediate level waste from Dungeness in Kent, and will do from the Sizewell A decommissioning. In front of those big buildings is what's called another safe store, somewhat erroneously labelled. When they were decommissioning, they said that this land would be completely flat by 2005, I think, originally. Then they moved it to 2015. That is a cover, a shell over the former spent fuel store, which they, unsurprisingly, found that was still highly radioactive. Here we've got the shells around the former reactor buildings, and what's contained within there is a cocktail of radionuclides that are going to be radioactive for some time. And this is a graph between them all. This is a summation of the dose rate. I know this is a little bit technical, but bear with me, because what we get is that is 80 years, and that is now considered potentially suitable low level for humans to go in and continue the dismantling. So therefore that will take it to the end of this century. So, I mean, I've got there a calculation about 2097. So this is what we are faced with in the future. Remember, we've got the 3 existing nuclear sites. They want to have 2 more. The top picture is the Sizewell site. On the left, you've got the former Sizewell A, the one with the dome in the middle, Sizewell B, and then the proposed Sizewell C. Underneath, we've got a schematic of the proposed Bradwell B. Sizewell C, on the 27th of May, what they call the Development Consent Order, the DCO, was submitted. And this is a stage which moves it closer to being a potential reality. So it's pretty tough for the people that are campaigning in that area. It's the same reactor design as Hinkley Point C. There are huge problems with the ones that are being built in Finland and in France, and they are pretty chunky, 3.2 gigawatts. If you want to know a bit more about that, I have another handy video which we may be able to link to. The impact on the local area of outstanding national beauty and the Royal Society Protection of Birds Minsmere site is huge. And then we've got, this is an aerial, a Google world view thing of the former Bradwell. In the distance behind it, you can see the RAF Bradwell Bay runways. And then this is what they're proposing. It is something like 3 times bigger than that proposed for Sizewell C. It is a vast industrial complex. And this is the stats. The stage 1 consultation closes on next Wednesday. It's a Chinese reactor design, none of which are working in the world. They're 1.15 gigawatts each. That detail we still don't know for definite, but it's going to be 2.3, 2.2 gigawatts. The impacts on the environmental designations, it's a triple SI. It's a national nature reserve. It's special areas of conservation. It's special protection areas. It's the Ramsar site, the most important wetland designation. And then beyond that, it's a marine conservation zone. There's going to be real potential impact on the indigenous oyster species that is found within this marine conservation zone, the largest one in England, 284 square miles. This is what we will land up with. This is an early shot of the devastation caused next to the Hinkley Point reactors in readiness for Hinkley Point C. This is going to be the devastation for Sizewell C in Suffolk and in Essex on what they call the Dengie Peninsula, the northeast part of the Dengie Peninsula. Also, they're giving us this wonderful compromise. So to protect the marine ecosystem in the very narrow and very shallow Blackwater estuary, they're giving us these cooling towers. But actually, this is a picture taken from the same point, and that is the size that they're proposing, and that is likely to be bigger than that in the fullness of time. So, I've just jumped forward. Safe, clean, reliable, and works whatever the weather. Well, we know that in 2018 and 2019, they've had to close reactors down in France because algae would form in the hot weather, jam up the intake pipes, and sometimes even just the temperature differential of the water was insufficient to allow proper cooling. And then climate change. Well, this is Sizewell site here, and further down, this is the Bradwell site. Why build 2 giant nuclear complexes and make them an island in a swimming pool. It defies sense. So this is one of the things that the nuclear industry puts out. We need more nuclear power to keep the lights on. Well, this is a very old-fashioned 20th century idea. Even with nuclear power stations, the way it worked before, it was always supply driven, and that's the top line. We have all these coal-fired and nuclear power stations and gas stations and Lord knows what, generating electricity, and we just hope and cross our fingers that demand never exceeds it. And then up here, we've got a little hump that breaks through the supply, and then that means that you get power cuts. Nowadays, it is completely different. It is driven by demand. And so the national grid and companies and big corporations are able to tailor the demand that they're putting on the grid when they are given warnings. It's all electronic, it's seamless. So we have very few power cuts. There was a move on from that in 2013 for this energy trilemma. Decarbonisation, yes. Nuclear power is only low carbon relatively at the point of generation. Building one is horrendous on the carbon, and now is the absolute worst time to build 2 new facilities in the eastern region. Affordability, well, we know nuclear is the most subsidised and the most expensive form of electrical energy generation. And energy security is a ridiculous idea because we have no indigenous uranium in this country. We have to buy it from places like Australia and third world countries, and they are, the ore and the original processing is heavily carbon intensive. This is my idea. No, it's not. It's a good idea. Called the energy trilateral: reduction, better home insulation, use of LED bulbs, localization, community energy schemes, solar PV on roofs, and then storage, not just battery storage, but that's really good, and electric car, feeding back to the grid using vehicle to grid, and large pumped water storage systems such as the one in Dynamofig in Wales. More nuclear power is needed to electrical vehicle charging. Well, whatever you think about electrical vehicles, this is still wrong. What the government predicted is that first line. It predicted a 15% increase in electricity demand. The next graph coming down gracefully is the actual demand over the last few years. The curve coming up is the increase in the number of cars, and this blue, I'm colorblind, so bear with, this blue line on the bottom is the, over this time period, the 7 years, the increase in electricity. So if we extrapolate forward and look at 2030 and say that half the cars on the road are electric cars, that's the amount of increased electricity demand. And that would be if they were all by 2030. But this is the big point. You then use so much less electricity because you are not refining crude oil into petrol and diesel. It makes a huge difference, something like 1 to 3. Nuclear power is 100% carbon free. Well, that's just complete nonsense. I'm going to rush on past this. It's a big debate, and as you're going to get the slides, folks can read through them, because there's one really important point that I want to get to before we open this up for questions. This is an app, by the way, that you can see what the current electricity mix generation is. It's really good and gives you the carbon intensity. We're trying to get to between 50 and 100 by the year 2030. That's the grams of carbon dioxide equivalent per kilowatt hour of generation. Homes use between 5 and 15 kilowatt hours per day. The problem about the energy mix is we have renewables and they are brilliant. We have wind and solar, but they are variable. So we need something to match that variability. Nuclear is on, and it is not, it is uncomfortable to be variable. And this is a real problem because they do not like to slow down reduce power on a nuclear power station because it shortens its life. This is the problem that we have. The 18.1% here is the electrical mix. This is the gas, the 30.7, and then the 44.6 is petroleum products. There's lots of ways we can reduce them. We'll look at ecotricity. When you sign up to ecotricity, the Green Party gets 50 quid. They're talking about anaerobic digestion of grasses, sustainable grown grass. They reckon 97%. Even the National Grid down here thinks 50% could be sorted out in the gas. So there are real possibilities. The other thing to look at is Zero Carbon Britain, cat.org.uk, a really excellent resource. Their way of getting down is highlighted in their documentation. I'm going to end with this. This is the elephant in the room, and it is the nuclear waste. On the font of all knowledge, the BBC Radio 4, the head of operations and development at Sellafield, now that is the principal nuclear waste processing plant in the UK, he said this: if you placed a teacup-sized piece of high-level waste derived from spent nuclear fuel in the middle of a football pitch, you and everyone in the stadium would be dead before you left the centre circle. That gives you an idea from within the industry of what they want to put on the coast for up until, well, if it starts, you've got 60 years for generation and then 140 years for storage. They're not going to take the spent fuel away. It's going to be stored on site of a crumbling sea level rise, coastal erosion affected sites in Bradwell and Sizewell. The other thing is, don't be fooled by the small modular reactors. They're going to be incredibly expensive, and they're all going to have, if they go ahead, a lot more than a teacup of this highly toxic radioactive spent fuel waste. So back to here, the Green Party policy: prohibit the construction of nuclear power stations. That means the new nuclear power stations. It's a distraction from developing renewable energy, and in other words, working with that trilateral of reduction and localization and storage. It carries an unacceptable risk because the spent fuel will be local to each facility, the waste, and then there's also the skill set that is being developed to keep the Trident thing going. So there you go. What can you do? Well, this is, you can join a group. You can bring the Green Party into the campaign groups such as Stop Sizewell C, Together Against Sizewell C, Bradwell Ban, Bradwell Action Network, and BANG. You can sign petitions, support campaigns. Support is much more important than signing. If you listen to Jenny, you would have heard that idea of doing something. Respond to the consultations. You can write to the developers, your councillors, your MP. You can contribute to challenge costs, legal challenge costs, and you can keep spreading the news. But the most important thing, vote Green. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. I really appreciate just the breadth of material you managed to get through in a very short space of time. There's certainly a lot for us all to absorb here, so we welcome having the slides circulated afterwards. And just as a reminder for everyone, particularly if you join partway through, that this session will be recorded and put on the Eastern Green Party website in the coming days, so you can catch up on anything you've missed. Just got 2 or 3 quick questions for you before we wrap up, Peter, from the audience. The first one is from Alison. Her question was around how the waste is shipped. You mentioned that early in the presentation that some of the waste is shipped to Cumbria. So how is that waste shipped, and what happens to it in Cumbria? What would you be able to tell us about that?
Okay, that's quite a complicated answer. It really depends on the licensing agreement from the Office for Nuclear Regulation as to how it is shipped, whether it is shipped by road or a combination of road and rail. From most places, it's the low-level waste, which is the protective material, mask, gloves, overalls, and so on. And that is generally shipped by road. That goes to a place called Drigg, which is on the coast. And some of that is being affected by sea level rise as well. The high level waste the intermediate level waste is generally staying on site and will only ever be moved once they build this thing called a geological disposal facility, which won't be built for 50 years and may never be built, nearly a kilometre underground and all that. The high level waste used to be shipped to Sellafield, but now the policy from Sizewell B onwards will be to have the spent fuel on site in a special store.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to add on 2 more questions. I appreciate lots of questions have just come in, but we're fairly short on time today, so please accept my apologies if your question is not selected. I will forward them on to Peter afterwards to see if he's able to respond. The next one is from Emma. If you're able to answer this, that's great. If not, no worries. What is our policy on Hinkley Point C? I think that's down in the southwest. Is the party opposed or in favour now that it's half built?
Well, the policy, if we looked word for word, it's prohibit the construction of nuclear power stations. So Hinkley Point C is being built, so therefore I think it would come under that policy. I think it would be stopped. But I guess that is a slight matter for interpretation. And hello again, Emma. I saw you this week, I believe, and you added another couple of questions. I can take those at the same time, Ed. And yes, I think EDF are incredibly economical with both facts and the truth. They are extremely good at taking a nugget of truth and spinning it out of all proportion, a bit like the low carbon claims and the jobs claims. All the jobs are just, they're not going to be local jobs apart from people that want fairly menial tasks done locally, and it's going to wreck local communities exactly as it is in Hinkley Point C, and as it did for Leiston when they built Sizewell B. I hope that answers your questions, Emma.
Thank you very much. And so the last question I'm going to put to Peter today. So again, apologies if your question hasn't been selected. It's purely because of time. And I'll pass these on to Peter afterwards to see if he's able to answer. So this one's from Jenny. In fact, 2 questions which I'll take together. They're probably quite brief. So what date is the Bradwell B site predicted to come below sea level? What are your views on the potential of the use of thorium in the future?
Okay, thorium is like a lot of promises. It is still going to have the issue of waste, even though they say it's not, and it's still going to produce weapons grade uranium. Not that we need uranium. It's not used in nuclear weapons at the moment. The nuclear weapon is generally a hydrogen bomb, so all the plutonium and uranium, it's not the right question. So thorium, I think, it's just one of these promises. Why? For instance, I was with the Office for Nuclear Regulation on a Zoom chat yesterday, a Zoom meeting, a very high level meeting, and they completely think that these advanced modular reactors, the new ideas, they're just going to put them on the shelf. So why would we go for something that's going to take so long? The carbon problem, the greenhouse gas problem, is a now problem. We have to do things now, not 30 years down the line. That's what I would say about thorium. It's a non-starter. What was the other question? I'm sorry.
I'm very sorry to interrupt, Ed, but Paul has indicated we to move to room B for the next talk. So
yes, we'll be wrapping up this talk in the next 60 seconds. Thank you, Richard. Thank you. The other question, Peter, was the date that Bradwell B is predicted to come below sea level.
Okay, 2100, the end of the century. Bear in mind, it's already in floodplain 2 and floodplain 3. So with the current seawall, which they're not going to change, they're going to build this thing on a huge plinth. So yeah, 2100 realistically.